Good morning, Mexico. I'm Ana Maria Salazar. Welcome to ADN 40 News. Today is Saturday, August 10th.
That it
How
is,
are you doing?
Ana Maria. Good morning, everyone. I'm Agustin Barros Gomez. We're here live from our studios in Mexico City. We've got a great program for you.
Right.
8 to 9 in English, 9 to 10 en Español. Then we're going to be having several guests. We're going to be talking about the U.S.-Mexico relationship.
We have an author of a very, very interesting book. We're going to be focusing on violence. What happened in Michoacán this week? Those are going to be some of the topics. What happened in El Paso? So those are some of the issues that we're going to be addressing this week. Thank you so much for joining us. And we're going to start this show, as we usually do, with domestic news. Diego N., member of Los Porquis, remember him? Band. He was part of this band. He was eventually sentenced to 5 years in prison and a 70 pesos fine due to his involvement in the rape of Daphne. Remember her? She's a 17-year-old girl. This happened in 2015. Although his defense could seek parole on his behalf, this and more are part of this week's news. Let's watch.
Federal police arrested Eduardo N., also known as El Tartamudo, member of Los Antrax criminal group. The capture took place at a hotel in Juchitán, Oaxaca. This suspect is related to the murder of 7 people in Santa Maria Petapa and other crimes in Istmo de Tehuantepec's region. On Tuesday, armed robbers broke into a Mexican government coin manufacturer, Casa de Moneda, to steal about 50 million pesos worth in coins. The robbery occurred when the vault had been left open, and it all happened in less than 10 minutes. Meanwhile, the Attorney General's office is questioning workers, security elements, and some police officers that may have been involved in the robbery. A video posted on social media shows another case of police abuse. A young man claims that 2 police officers from Toluca, state of Mexico, tried to rob and extort him.
Fuiste tú, me fuiste a llevar al banco, me llevaste a mi casa, me robaste.
Following the release of these images, the government dismissed these officers and initiated an investigation for abuse of power. Meanwhile, a legal process began against Natalia N., the driver who ran over and killed an 83-year-old woman and injured 2 others in Mexico City. The suspect remains at Santa Marta Catitla's prison. The video of an armed robbery at a minibus went viral on social media. It happened in Chalco, state of Mexico. Everything is calm until one of the muggers shoots inside the van, while his accomplices strip the passengers from their belongings. Meanwhile, some Facebook users who are sick of the insecurity in a public transportation disseminated the robbers' identities. However, the suspects still remain at large. In Mexico City, authorities investigate the attack against a motorist in Tlalpan. After a small mishap, a woman nicknamed as Lady Piñata hits the victim's vehicle and smashes the windows. The video went viral. Police began an investigation for injuries, damages, and threats to all those responsible. 7 alleged kidnappers were lynched at the municipality of Cohuecan, Antepexco in Puebla. They have been accused of kidnapping a farmer. There are no arrests. On Thursday morning, Michoacán's authorities located 19 bodies in different roads that connect the cities of Uruapan with Pátzcuaro. There have been more than 80 murders in the year. That's why the state government requested the support of the National Guard. ADN 40 News.
And continuing with these news, the authorities in Michoacán identified 12 of the 19 bodies that were found in that state. The prosecutor, Adrián López Solís, confirmed that the victims were members of organized crime. They tested positive on the toxicological scale for methamphetamine. Authorities also possess a closed-circuit television footage of some of the criminals involved in the case.
And to talk about this recent case in Michoacán, joining us today is Julio Sabines, security expert. Good morning, Julio.
Good morning, Julio.
Ana Maria Agustin.
Is society officially falling apart, or just slowly?
Well, no, it's a terrible situation. We're seeing right now a big confrontation between drug organizations. So, Cártel Jalisco Nueva Generación is fighting to expand its territory very aggressively in every region of the country. So what we just saw in Michoacán is a reflection of that.
What's different now? Because this reminds me of the 2010, 2011, when we'd see these massacres, and then there would be hanging bodies.
No.
We're going back to that. Why now? What has happened in the last year and a half?
Well, just a month ago, the Secretary of Security died in a helicopter crash. The local state of Michoacán Security Secretary. So we've seen that the organization, Jalisco organization, criminal drug dealing organization, it's having a big confrontation against other cartels.
What is it? Who are they?
Well,
Los Viagras?
Right, specifically in Michoacán, Los Viagras. So, yeah, it's very similar because it responds to local heads of the organization. And
what are they fighting over?
Control of territory. I mean, Michoacán, Uruapan, for example, when we see these, it's a region very rich in economic prosperity. So they are trying to have complete control over that.
So it's extortion, kidnapping.
No.
What else?
And the route traffic over what comes from Lázaro Cárdenas, probably methamphetamines, and we have laboratories identified in this area. So
meth labs.
Yeah.
Wow. So what should the state government, federal government, what should they be doing now? Because this just most recent case, 20 bodies in a couple of hours is just
terrorism.
It is shocking. Well, it is shocking.
I agree. I mean, first of all, we should see it as terrorism. And terrorism acts should be classified as that and should be responded as such. But, well, we've seen that the local authorities and federal authorities are not classifying it such as.
There is a debate as to whether it's, and we're going to be talking to an expert later on, whether what happened in the United States, El Paso, it would be considered terrorism under the Mexican law. But it's hard to it's hard to prosecute for terrorism. So where are we then? I mean, because
the bottom line is the lack of capacity of the state to actually function with respect to whether it be terrorism, whether it be murder. They're not doing anything about it anyway.
Right. Well, I've said many times before. I mean, this is a matter of impunity. So in order to challenge and fight these types of crimes, we have to strengthen the capabilities of the prosecutors and.
Yeah, well, let me ask you one last question. So what they're fighting for is to control parts of the state of Michoacán so they can kidnap, they can extortion, and to be able to move meth. Is that correct? It's not narcomenudeo?
No, no. Mostly it's meth labs and the routes for the
traffic.
Where the traffic is coming from Lázaro Cárdenas,
which is the port.
Which is important, and the economic prosperity of the region, avocado and extortion.
Julio Sabines, you're going to be joining us in about 45 minutes in our Spanish-speaking version of the show. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
In a while.
Thank you for having me.
Shall we continue?
Yeah, and we continue with President Andrés Manuel López Obrador. He mentioned the recent violent events in Michoacán. This and more is part of AMLO's weekly agenda. Let's take a look.
President Andrés Manuel López Obrador condemned the barbaric shooting in El Paso and mourned the loss of 22 people. On Sunday, Mexican officials denounced the mass shooting and vowed to support the Mexican families that have lost relatives during the attack. Besides, the president urged the U.S. government to review its gun control laws. He highlighted that this barbaric act should prompt reflection, analysis, and lead to the decision to control the indiscriminate sales of guns.
Sí debe de replantearse este asunto, porque afecta mucho, en este caso, a los estadounidenses y también nos afecta a nosotros.
The Mexican government announced Sunday that it will auction off Shenli Yegon's mansion in Mexico City, along with other 25 properties. The house is on a 0.3-acre lot in the upper crust neighborhood of Las Lomas de Chapultepec, According to experts, the old drug trafficker's house is valued at approximately 95 million pesos. The pink villa was seized in 2007 after authorities seized guns and more than $205 million in cash, weighing nearly 2 tons. The proceeds from Mr. Yegon's house auction will go towards supporting youth scholarships in Mexico. In fact, AMLO vowed to support young athletes, particularly those who have competed in the last Pan American Games in Lima, Peru.
Y se va a dar un estímulo adicional a los que hayan obtenido medallas. Un adicional de 40,000 pesos para oro, 35,000 mensual para plata y 25,000 para bronce mensual.
President Andrés Manuel López Obrador announced a new federal health system to replace Seguro Popular, the current health program which offers healthcare services to people with no other insurance. The Health Institute for Well-Being will be responsible for the acquisition of medicines, healing material, and medical equipment. The president said his administration is considering hiring retirees and former members of the health sector.
Para mejorar este sistema de salud, estamos contemplando que se va a incrementar el presupuesto para el año próximo en 40,000 millones de pesos. Es el presupuesto actual más inflación y un presupuesto adicional o un monto adicional de 40,000 millones de pesos.
The Mexican president urged political parties to cut their budgets by half in 2020.
Imagínense de obtener fondos para la educación, para la salud. Además, ustedes me van a ayudar, ¿no? Todos me van a ayudar. No es presionar a nadie, es voluntario, pero hacerlo público, transparente, la vida pública cada vez más pública.
ADN 40 News.
Now let's move on to to give you an update to this shooting, this massacre that took place in El Paso, Texas. 21-year-old suspect Patrick Crucius waived his right to remain silent. He waived his Miranda rights. So basically, we have a lot of information about why he did this. According to the arrest affidavit that was made public, the defendant or the accused confessed that he entered this store with an AK-47 rifle. An AK-47 rifle to kill Mexicans. He actually stated, "I'm going there to kill Mexicans." This according to a report by the Washington Post. Crucius has been charged with capital murder. He's being held without bond, and he is probably facing the death penalty.
And with respect to this violent event, Donald John Trump offered his condolences to the victims' relatives while visiting both El Paso, Texas, where he was not all that welcome, and Dayton, Ohio. This and more is part of Donald Trump's week. Let's take a look.
Hate has no place in America.
With this statement, Donald Trump condemned the 2 mass shootings left 29 deaths last weekend. He claimed that mental illness and video games were the main cause of those attacks that have become more frequent in the last decades.
We must recognize that the internet has provided a dangerous avenue to radicalize disturbed minds and perform demented acts.
Meanwhile, on Twitter, he wrote to suggest stricter rules for the purchase of weapons, like a background legislation check. Although he did ask for it to be linked with changes in much-needed immigration reform. The tycoon traveled to Dayton, Ohio to meet with survivors, families of the victims, and emergency personnel. but he was welcomed with several protests. Something similar happened in El Paso, Texas, where his anti-immigration rhetorics confronted him. But his speech focused on the work done by rescuers.
And I wanted to come and thank you, because you're very special people, and nobody like you. There's nobody better.
Trump also hit the media for disseminating what he called fake news. He said that they worked extra hours to belittle him during both trips. He also posted a couple of videos with his own version of the day. Although he did not release some accusations which bore him the responsibility of the recent mass shootings, especially one claim from Democratic presidential candidate Joe Biden, who challenged the incumbent Republican to judge the acts committed by white supremacists.
It's both clear language and in code. This president has fanned the flames of white supremacy in this nation. His low energy, vacant-eyed mouthing of the words written for him, condemning white supremacists this week, I don't believe fooled anyone, at home or abroad. Trump readily, eagerly attacks Islamic terrorism, but can barely bring himself to use the words white supremacy.
ADN 40 News.
8 Mexicans were killed during last week's shooting massacre in El Paso. The Mexican government sent a diplomatic note requesting to identify all risks against fellow Mexicans. The Secretary of Foreign Affairs also expressed that hate speech should not take place in any society because it generates this divisions and violence, acts that are not compatible with both nations' brotherhood or fraternity.
And to analyze the effects of on these past shootings on gun control, the United States and the U.S.-Mexico relationship, we welcome Natasha Urin from the Mexican Council on Foreign Relations, COMEXI. Natasha, so you're just coming back from the border, correct?
I was actually on the border the day of the shootings. I was in San Diego.
Right. So talk to us about the reaction. Talk to us about this division. Now we talk about this guy wanted to kill Mexicans, quote unquote, but of course it's Mexican Americans who are actually U.S. citizens. It's actual Mexican citizens. So it's all intermixed with the U.S.-Mexico relationship in general. Talk to us about that.
Because the reality is that Mexico has an intermixed relationship with the United States. We not only share borders, we share environmental issues in the border right in El Paso with Ciudad Juárez, but we do so in San Diego, Tijuana. We have a very strong synergy between our borders. We're very linked.
The most legally crossed border in the world. So with respect to guns, so guns are crossing the border from the United States into Mexico, not just drugs from Mexico to the United States. They're now talking about some sort of gun control legislation with respect to at least some background checks. Talk to us about how that's developing and what Mexico should be doing.
It's a discussion that's still in Senate. Yesterday, Trump said there was no real need to go back to session to discuss gun control. So we're not going to see a lot happening. No. We know how much money the NRA puts into different candidates, including Trump, especially the Republicans.
The gun lobby.
Right, the gun lobby.
Yeah, so we're not going to see that happening, but we do have an opportunity in Mexico, the same way as we're being asked to be accountable about our migration, about our southern border. I think Mexico has an opportunity to demand the same status from the United States. We saw after the shootings in the mosque in New Zealand, United States did not attend the calling that was made by the Prime Minister, what's it called, the Church Hill Summit. So we know the United States doesn't want to go into the discussion. And what happened, which is actually incredible, 252 people died from shootings right after the Paso attempt, right? So there is a problem, and it's an epidemic that's killing the United States, but it's also killing us. You were talking about what happened in Michoacán.
Right.
Those guns are coming into our...
Those are American guns, right?
See, this makes this discussion even more complex, because before, Mexico demanded that the United States has to do something about the trafficking of guns from the United States into Mexico. It sounds like what you're talking about is now Mexico, due to the fact that they're clearly attacking Mexicans, Mexican nationals, and Mexican Americans, that the Mexican government should be taking a stance and go into domestic politics, telling the United States, you need to do something about your laws. Is that what you're saying?
I think Mexico could, and Mexico has the leverage to do so. The United, they should. At this stage, I think we do.
But why?
Due to the shootings, due to the hatred speech.
Okay.
Thanks to the hatred speech that Trump has been developing, that's only going to create more xenophobic attacks. It's going to become more targeting towards our community, where we have 4 million Mexican Americans first generation who have dual citizenship. Then we've got up to 30 million.
What would be Mexico's bargaining chip? I mean, what can Mexico bargain with? Because this discussion they've had, because I know the Mexican government has tried to have this discussion in the United States, and they had stopped, they literally stopped to the point where they said, we're not going to get involved in domestic discussions. The United States has their right to interpret the Second Amendment whatever they want. But the United States does not have the right to allow so much guns being sold in the border coming into Mexico.
So most of the guns come from the southern border, which is really important. 57% from Texas.
How can the Mexican government pressure the United States?
What about the legal suit that the Mexican government is bringing to the United States?
Well,
it's a different kind of suit, because they're not actually talking about gun control in the suit. They're asking for extradition, which has similarities to when they ask, and we're not going to get anywhere really. It's just a political position, which makes Mexico feel and gives it a right on the table, and it also has given an opportunity to continue media approach. But what Ana Maria is asking, I think, is super important. Why do we have the opportunity? Because Mexico brings a lot into the table when it comes to security of the United States. Agustin won't let me lie here, but there's only been one terrorist crossing the borders, and it wasn't from Mexico. We signed treaties. It was from Canada. We've signed treaties, Aspen, where we are guaranteeing our visas are being checked by the United States. We don't have Arab citizens walking around from Dubai or so on, because we are protecting the security interests of the United States. So I think we do get a leverage, we do get a say in the table, we do get to have a negotiation and say what kind of control we want.
Natasha, thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you very much.
We look forward to continuing this conversation in the future.
Let's go to a commercial break. Don't go away. We've got much more ahead here in ADN 40 News.
We'll be right back.
Yeah.
Welcome back to ADN 40 News. We're also on Twitter, by the way, at Agustin Barrios G. In my case, at Ana Maria, at AM Salazar. In the case of Ana Maria Salazar. So the question is, what goes on inside the mind of a mass murderer? According to experts, one of the main reasons that they commit their atrocious acts is to show some sort of superiority. And here's part of the explanation. We're going to be looking into that in a few moments, but let's take a look.
En lo que va de 2019 se han presentado más de 250 ataques a tiros en los Estados Unidos, en al menos 15 con más de 4 personas muertas.
These mass murderers commit attacks like the one that occurred last Saturday in El Paso, Texas. They mostly attack based on superiority ideologies over other people.
Pero si aparte hay discursos racistas, etcétera, etcétera, pues se compra como una idea de nacionalismo y se ataca a los que se creen como el objeto temible.
Los delitos que ellos cometen son delitos de carácter racial, de carácter étnico, de carácter de exterminio.
From May 2019 up to date, President Donald Trump has published on social media more than 2,300 messages against the Hispanic community. Spree and mass murderers believe in this rhetoric.
Pero ¿qué pasa por la mente de un asesino de masas o spree killer, como le llaman en Estados Unidos? ¿Qué pasa por su psique?
El asesino en masa tiene mucho odio, mucha tristeza, que se disfraza con odio y que trata como de compensarlo a través del acto de crueldad.
They are murderers that operate consciously, without impulses. They see their actions as a way to apply justice.
Se demostró que no están enfermos absolutamente de nada, que su constitución neurofisiológica les permite actuar de esa forma. Podremos decir inclusive que actúan sin maldades.
Pero está horrible aquí la situación, ¿eh? Ay, Dios mío. Nunca me había pasado esto.
Regularmente estas personas actúan en solitario, incluso buscan el reconocimiento social y están vinculadas a grupos defensores de las armas de fuego.
Este personaje tiene un gran reconocimiento a nivel nacional, que es lo peor. Sí es acusado como asesino, pero detrás de eso viene el reforzamiento social de todos aquellos que le han mandado mensajes, que le han mandado cartas, que han abrido páginas de Facebook felicitándolo.
These mass murderers usually dehumanize their victims, lose a grip on reality, and imitate terrorist acts.
Siente piedad por sus similares, por aquellos que le retroalimentaron esta base ideológica, pero siente un odio irracional hacia aquellos que considera que son los enemigos.
That's the profile of those who deliberately open fire against their alleged inferiors. ADN 40 News.
And to further understand what goes inside the mind of mass murderers, we welcome Sofia Perez Banuet. She is a psychiatrist. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
I guess one of my first questions is, when you look at this mass murder in El Paso, do you perceive any basic difference between that mass murder and those who commit murders here in Mexico? Well, I mean, what would be the difference?
Well, I think the biggest difference is the access to
guns.
It's
the bottom line, because Donald Trump, during his when he spoke immediately after, hours after the El Paso massacre, he basically said he didn't talk about gun control. He said, this was just mental problems, video games. He blamed violent video games.
Do you think it's about first-person shooter games?
No, definitely not. I mean, all over the world there are video games. In India is one of the countries where there is the most players of video games.
Right.
So
Korea, South Korea,
and
they have tiny
the mass
murder
shootings
rates,
that happen in the United States are the.
Well, let me ask you
highest
this.
in the world,
Okay,
sure.
yeah, let me ask you this, because when you look at the mass shootings in the United States, you literally have a person who has access to a gun, who's been radicalized in some way, which I think there's another aspect to this. But when you look at Mexico, I mean, there's always this question mark: we don't have disturbed people in Mexico, or they are there, but they don't have access to guns? Is that really the biggest difference?
Well, there are mass shootings in Mexico, just to be perfectly clear.
But it's not.
Are they of the same nature?
I mean, that's. See.
For instance, this last mass shooting in El Paso is being investigated as a crime of hate.
Right.
So in the United States, we have to talk about these violent extremists who are also committing crimes because of their access to guns.
Now, they're always referencing, from my observation, what's going on here, they're always referencing the people who came before, right? The Parkland shooters and all these different shooters, as if there were some sort of lineage for mass murder. So it would seem that there is an element of copycat, there's an element of fad. I remember in the 1980s or 90s, there was the postal shootings. There was a spate of mass shootings in mail facilities. So there seems to be an element of fad. Why are people attracted to this?
Recent studies are showing that there's this thing called generalized imitation, and it's this thing you mentioned, the copycat. So when this suggests that when people see a behavior, they tend to imitate it. And when the person is someone they, look up to. Admire. Yeah. And if there's this study also that it's because of the way the media portrays this event, there's like a 13% increase in the mass shootings when one happens.
Okay.
Right.
And so it's this
there is a
generalized
viral
imitation.
phenomenon.
It's
There
like
is
a
a
secular
Which is very interesting, because we have to tell our audience right now, there is an alert in the United States, because there are fears. In fact, they did arrest one person who was dressed in camouflage with a gun one of these assault rifles, walking into one of these stores. So they were able to at least follow, and they detained him. But by law, if you have the right, and this is a crazy thing, if by law in the United States you have the right to carry a gun, an assault gun, the police, and you are walking around in a store, the police can't stop you. I mean, so they had, but there is this alert going on. What also seems interesting is that this phenomena of hate in the United States, we don't really see it here in Mexico. I mean, they don't, when there's these shootouts and these murders, it has to do with other things.
It has to do with organized crime.
It's organized crime or violence, family situations.
Yeah, family killers.
But in the United States, they're murdering people because of their religion, because of their ethnicity or origin. And people forget, if you work with the federal government, people forget the Oklahoma, that took place. The car bomb that killed more than 200 people who worked in a federal building. So, when you look at these types of crimes in the United States that are based on who you are, who the objective, how do we make sure that this doesn't happen in Mexico?
I think,
we don't have those types of murders. It's not based on religion or color. I mean,
they're not hate
crimes. They're not hate crimes. Yeah. Do we have to worry about that?
I don't think so. Maybe. In the United States, this white supremacism that's not, for instance, Trump doesn't talk about it, but it's like an extremist group that we don't have here in Mexico.
Well, if you actually look at what the platform is for most Republicans running for office these days, then you're sort of forced into the situation because they do call them invaders. Right. They do say that they're bringing crime, that they're that they're rapists, subhumans, and all of these different things. So you kind of have to. You're kind of forced into that situation. If you're a 21-year-old that has no other reason for being, then why wouldn't you be shooting at these invaders who are trying to replace, quote unquote, good white people in your country?
Well, people have, or psychologists have been trying to make up like a profile of these mass murders, but it's really difficult. The things we know is that it's mostly men, and it's mostly young men under 40. Single, that they're isolated, socially isolated. They don't tend to make a lot of relationships, but that's what...
Sofia Perez, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Promise me you'll come back.
We're going to go to a commercial break, and we'll be right back. And after these tragic events, raids against undocumented immigrants continued in America. And one of them actually happened this week in Jackson, Mississippi. Let's take a look.
It was a hard blow for the Latino community in the United States. U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement officers raided 7 food processing plants in Jackson, Mississippi, and detained approximately 600 migrants, including 88 Mexicans.
These are not new laws.
Estas no son leyes nuevas, ni la aplicación de ellas es nueva. El arresto es el resultado de una investigación criminal de 1 año y los arrestos y allanamientos realizados son solo otro paso en esa investigación.
In a matter of minutes, dozens of families were separated and several children were left on their own.
Governments, please put your heart. Let my parents be free with everybody else, please. Don't leave the child with cryiness and everything.
After several hours, more than a half of those immigrants were released for humanitarian reasons, although they should appear before a federal court to clarify their situation in that country. Meanwhile, the Mexican government announced support for each fellow compatriot detained.
La instrucción que tenemos también es que aquellos que fuesen repatriados sean acompañados, en este caso por autoridades de la Secretaría de Gobernación, y reciban propuesta y empleo, salud y educación, si así lo desean y lo necesitan.
A few weeks ago, Donald Trump announced massive raids aimed to stop more than 2,000 illegal migrants. But the truth is that they haven't been very successful. ADN 40 News.
And this is another N40 News alert. Financier Jeffrey Epstein has been found dead. He apparently hanged himself, and he was found. His body was found around 7:30 a.m. local time in his jail cell in New York. He has been charged of sex trafficking. This is huge news.
This is huge, yeah. You're talking about this supposedly this ring of pedophiles who include a former governor of New Mexico and former president of the United States.
Very important people.
But we need to go to a commercial
break. We'll be right back.
Yeah, we'll talk about it when we come back.
Welcome back to ADN 40 News. Now let's go to China. You know, China's central bank weakened the yuan and triggered fears that the standoff between Washington and Beijing could deepen. The moves have deeply affected financial markets around the world. Here's the story.
China let its currency slide to its weakest level in over a decade on Monday. It's a sign of the steps Beijing's willing to take in its trade war with the United States. The Chinese yuan hasn't fallen lower than 7 to the dollar since May 2008 during the global financial crisis. But the trade war is putting pressure on China's exporters. And last week, President Donald Trump threatened to tariff everything the country sends to the United States.
China has to do a lot of things to turn it around. But you'll be seeing they've got to do a lot of things. It goes on September 1st. And frankly, if they don't do them, I can always increase it very substantially.
In 2015, Beijing stunned the markets when it devalued the yuan by 2%. It burned through over $1 trillion in foreign exchange reserves to keep the currency steady. On Monday, China didn't reveal much about its latest move, but the central bank linked the weak yuan to fallout from the trade war. U.S. officials and President Donald Trump have long criticized Beijing over manipulating its currency. They say China does it to gain an advantage in trade. And now a weaker yuan could mean a new target for Washington's trade war wrath. That prospect fueled panic among investors already spooked by the threat of new tariffs. On Monday, Asian markets hit their lowest in half a year and saw their steepest daily drop in 10 months.
And understand what's going on with China's the reactions to China's central bank allowing the yuan to depreciate and how it affected financial markets. We welcome to the studio Diana Cerros. She's our in-house financial analyst. Diana, the eternal question: why should we care?
Okay, so first, China's currency depreciation now breached the psychological barrier of 7 yuan per dollar, and so the yuan are throughout the year depreciated around 2.5%. So, is it true that China is a currency manipulator, or is it not?
Of course they are.
No, they're not.
Oh, seriously?
Weren't they trying to prop up the yuan a couple of weeks ago?
Well, I mean, first, we have to understand that the yuan is not a free-floating currency just as major currencies are. So, for example, if you see the Mexican peso and how it develops or how it moves, you can see, at some point 19.1 pesos per dollar, and then it can go up to, 19.8 in a matter of seconds, right?
Oh, but this happened. Donald Trump threatens, I'm going to impose 10% tariffs.
That's right.
So what do they do?
Right.
So we devaluate the yuan 17%.
First, this is, the yuan is fixed based on the previous, the previous close. And then the central bank kind of intervenes so that it doesn't appreciate or depreciate more than 2 percentage points, right? So, yeah, the government or the central bank in this case intervenes. That's true. But Donald Trump has imposed tariffs on Chinese goods, and they're now up to 25%, right? And then the total of Chinese exports can be
cheaper. They're going to be cheaper
taxed.
if you. Well, they will be taxed, but if they depreciate, it's cheaper.
So China's China's central bank has depreciated the currency 2.5%, and so is it okay? Yes, because sometimes the proportion that the currency should be depreciated is equal to the proportion of or the ratio of imported goods used as inputs.
Right.
So let's assume it's around, I don't know, 5 or 10%, then the central bank is, kind of containing the depreciation.
But of course, then Donald Trump comes out and says, well, if you guys devaluate, we're going to devaluate the dollar. Seriously?
He kind of wants a weaker dollar, right? Because that's good for American exports. But still, I mean, it's if they just
the
don't
markets
negotiate.
Don't like this. Markets don't like this.
They don't. But they thought it was going to be like in 2016 and 2015 when China depreciated the yuan in a disorderly way.
This is disorderly.
Fair enough. So we're going to continue this conversation, Deanna. We've got a lot more to talk about. Thank you very much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. And now,
Nowhere Mean and Delicate. That is the name of the third novel by Professor William Clark Murray. A good option for reading this summer. It's a story of adventure, mystery, and emotion centered on a man that meditates about his life and the bad things that he's done with the hope that he can actually cleanse his soul. This copy captures the unique characters that react in different ways according to the plot described by the author. It's a game of context that makes us question our authority and autonomy.
Professor Murray, welcome
Good
to
morning.
the show. You live in Mexico.
Yes.
You've been here since 2001, and you teach at the Tec de Monterrey. Is that
That's correct,
What do you
yes.
teach?
I teach philosophy and sometimes literature.
And you write books. Tell us about your novel.
Is this about a dystopia, about a
It sounds
utopia?
like it.
Does it say anything about the current historical moment?
A little bit, yeah. There's a little bit of jabs at politics, but it's an island. It starts off as a utopic scenario, but it eventually, throughout the novel, becomes a bit tragic, and it falls to pieces thanks to the protagonist.
So is it a sort of Lord of the Flies scenario where everything falls apart?
Like maybe Lord of the Flies meets Malcolm Lowry and Under the Volcano.
Oh, really?
Yeah, maybe, yeah.
And you're an author that lives in Mexico, and you write novels in English. I mean, that has to mean something,
Yeah, irony has always been a inspiration for me. Selling books in English is a challenge, yes.
Yeah.
But it's writing in Spanish would be difficult for me.
Yeah.
So.
But and the book, if you were to think, just give us some examples of of when you look at this story in real life. I mean, who are we thinking about?
Well, in the media or in various works of fiction, certainly movies, you see outcasts who live well together, and depending on the context, their behavior can be wonderful, it could be tragic, and then you remove that context and they become completely different animals.
Yeah.
So
you teach philosophy. Tell us, what do you teach?
Well, I call it philosophy light because it's a philosophy that we can put into practice because discussing a certain philosophy with students, it becomes real. It becomes something that can be applied. So it's down to earth as opposed to in the clouds.
Give us some examples, because I remember my philosophy class. I really did not really appreciate. No,
I also
didn't dislike.
didn't like
I just didn't see. I just couldn't. I couldn't apply it to my life. I couldn't understand it.
But that's just me.
Give us some examples.
Okay. Well, I sympathize, and I totally hear you. Lately, it's very sexy philosophy of technology. So that's already in our hands, right? So it's already something that we can apply. It's not Aristotle. It's not Socrates. It's writers of the 20th century, 21st century who are applying philosophy through technology, looking at the social relations that come about as a result of our relationship with technology.
I mean, can you change people's behavior as they talk about this? Because ultimately, you're trying to look for people to at least to understand. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do. Yeah. No, I don't think you can. But it's the technologies that are influencing our behavior. So, and that's the philosophy that we focus on.
Give us other examples.
Well, let's see here. I like the author Andrew Feenberg, who talks about the 10 paradoxes of technology. Our relationship to technology and to the world is paradoxical as humans.
Right.
We are basically, well, first of all, we're destroying ourselves and each other and the planet. And that's a paradoxical relationship because we need the planet to live. And so Feenberg, discusses these 10 paradoxes and asks us to challenge or question, wait a minute, is there another way to...
That's great. Clark, thank you very much for being with us,
We're going to test
Clark
your
Murray.
students to see if they saw you this
That's
one.
right.
Hi to all the students at Tec de Monterrey. Yes,
That's right.
thank you.